Thank you for joining us for another Ohio Learns 360 webinar. I'm Yigal Kaufman from IdeaStream Public Media. Today we're talking about the issue of math literacy and how parents can encourage math literacy in their children, especially in the elementary school years. We're going to talk about how they can create habits that will lead them to success in the future. Joining me today for that discussion, we have Brian Bickley from the Ohio Department of Education, as well as education tech consultant Katie Kormanik. Let's get started. Brian, our first question is for you. I'm wondering, what would you say is the current state of things in terms of math literacy? Are kids into math? What's the direction that the subject is heading these days?
From a state perspective, we certainly have seen from some of our state data that, our ELA recovery is getting better. Our students are getting closer, if not back to their academic performance pre-pandemic in the area of reading, whereas in math, we're still not there. So we're trying to make more of a concerted effort at the department to try to help really support students in completing some of the unfinished learning as a result of the pandemic and its impact on our instruction as an educational community. And so some of the things we're doing at the department is, we certainly have a lot of initiatives, a few in particular related to elementary math, like tutoring. We have a tutoring program that's really initiated out of higher ed, using some of their pre-service teachers to go into schools and work with students, in small numbers, like 1, 2, or 3 at a time, to help really get them that more intensive support to help fill some of the learning gaps as a result of the pandemic. We also have an intervention opportunity for 6-8 math that'll be starting early in 2024 to help get students that intervention support in middle school. In terms of our kids into math, I think a lot of that depends on the community around them in their attitude toward it. If it's very cold and procedural, you may not have a lot of enthusiasm. But if you show students the math and the world around them and how it really is, it's everywhere. It's everywhere in their day-to-day lives, and you allow them that opportunity to explore and really value the process and the varying approaches. I think it can become, almost like an educational art form. There's a lot of different ways you can solve very routine, familiar problems. And it can be fun to engage in those discussions at any grade level, kindergarten all the way through college.
Now, we recently had a webinar that dealt with the issue of screen time. And so the question is, could educational entertainment be one of the ways that we create interest in math for students? Do you think that there's a way to turn that screen time problem maybe into a win on math literacy?
There are certainly some children's programming out there that really do get a nice, fun, comical, breath of fresh air approach into elementary math concepts, number blocks, and I think like number chains. There's another number themed preschool and early elementary aged program out there, and they really do a lot with arrays or base 10 blocks as sort of the characters in the story to emphasize the counting structure and groupings of students. And that's a nice way to sort of explore and introduce some elementary concepts. But also with screen time, I'd say there's a delicate balance there. If the screen time is spent overwhelmingly on procedural fluency without the accompanying conceptual understanding, then I think you're getting back to, is math meant to be more of a study of the ability to solve relevant real world problems and in the solving be able to communicate those diverse approaches to problem solving, or is it more about answer getting? And if it's imbalanced towards answer getting, I think that's where we turn a lot of students off.
Katie, what do you think about this question in terms of screen time? Are there online resources or games that you think, perhaps other than TV programming, can help children to develop their math skills?
I have yet to see games that can really teach kids everything they need to know to get that conceptual understanding. I think it can be a nice supplement, like a new way of looking at something or visualizing something. But to really understand math and to be excited about math, I think it really has to be the way it's talked about, especially at home, where when parents talk about math, they're excited, like, let's solve this problem together and build this growth mindset, or this mindset like yeah, I want to solve a problem and we can do it as a family and it can be a fun activity. It doesn't have to have all these bells and whistles where we need all these things to make kids excited at math. It's kind of like taking vegetables and loading it with sugar so that kids like it better. Like, that's not really a good idea. They need to understand the fundamentals and ideally enjoy really grasping that. So I just think, like, with lots of practice of those fundamentals, and once kids really get to understand how it works and that light bulb goes off and they get excited that yes, they did it, they solved this problem, I think that serves as a reinforcing loop to make them even more excited about solving more problems without all these bells and whistles, without games and things like that. And one resource that I really like is called IXL Learning, just the letters. And they have tons of problems and exercises that are free. And it also shows what kids should know at each level. So pre-K, kindergarten, first grade. So I think that's a really good resource.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what you were just describing? It sounds like a math-rich environment in the home is what would foster the best outcomes for kids. Can you describe that a little more in depth? What does a math-rich environment look like for a family?
Yeah, first of all, definitely something that is spoken about positively. Like, there are so many opportunities day to day to talk positively about math and just incorporate it into just the regular conversation, like baking, personal finance. I know personal finance is a big thing that a lot of people are scared about or they don't want to talk about, or just like math, it's kind of a daunting thing. But the more it can be talked about, like, we want to save $100 this month. Like, are we on track for that? Or we want to save 20%, that can just embed these math concepts into just day-to-day living. Did you brush your teeth for 2 minutes? Has it been 2 minutes? How many seconds did you spend on each tooth? Like, there's so many things that parents can talk about with their kids that are just, it might not seem like math, but it is.
I think for some people, math is stressful, even when you're an adult. So creating that math-rich environment is difficult because if as an adult you lack confidence in your math proficiency, how do you inspire confidence in your kids? Do you have some input on that?
Yeah, so I think it's very common for parents to be daunted about math too. So I think the way they approach it, they don't have to know all the answers, but it can be something where they say, I don't know, but let's solve it together. And let's see if, like, you and I can figure it out together, and it's an activity. So if they approach it with a fun, positive mindset, I think the kids will too.
Yeah, and to echo kind of what Katie's just said there, I think a lot of it can be valuable when you place the emphasis around the different approaches to problem solving and the thinking, and not always, the speed or the automaticity, but rather, okay, here's how I address the problem. Here's how I thought of it in my head, or here's how I went about solving it. And you can have that discourse between members of the family and adults, teachers and students, students and community members, because the one nice thing with math, just like so many other situations in the real world, there's more than one way to go about solving it and addressing it. And by having that discourse around the different approaches to problem solving, you're valuing the thinking, you're evaluating the approach that each learner is taking to solving it. And I think that puts a real value on just like, the art form that math can be. There's a lot of different ways you can solve very common problems.
Well, I think in addition to this question of whether or not they're good at math, some parents find helping their children with math is difficult because their children are doing math in ways that they don't recognize and using methods that they don't recognize. So can you talk a little bit about how these things have really changed and whether they're really different, or is it just different packaging of the same concepts?
I would say where I wonder if just parents sometimes struggle with just remembering where students are in the learning progression. And so the parents have the benefit of additional years of math learning. And because they have that extra experience, they know some of the shortcuts, or they've already done the mathematical thinking, and they figured out ways that they can flexibly problem solve, whereas the student is still in that beginning stage. And so for a student, they may have a problem solving strategy that will likely appear inefficient to the adult, but for the student, that is their efficient method. And for some students, they may be at that early phase of learning where the concrete or the pictorial is their preferred entry point to problem solving, whereas the adult is already at that symbolic. They don't need to draw the picture because they have advanced to where they can use the more efficient algorithm, and that's fine in both cases. And that's where that dialogue comes in. Of, this is how I thought about it, this is how I think of it, versus this is how somebody else thinks about it. And you can just use something as simple as show me 3/4, and one person may write 3 circles with 25 in the center to represent 3 25-cent quarters. Another person may draw a picture split into quarters and shade 3 of the 4. Somebody else may write 3 with the fraction bar, and then 4 underneath as the denominator, 3/4 of a whole. And those are all correct answers to that common question. But now we talk about the thinking and the equivalence and the different representations, and really valuing the thinking and the approach, and not necessarily always just, well, which is right. They're all right. They all answered the question that we asked. They just thought about it differently, because learners of all ability levels are going to think differently, and that's okay, and that's what we want.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point Brian made, that math can be creative. A lot of people don't realize that. They might think of it as black and white, like there's a problem, find the solution. But yeah, there's so many ways to get to the solution. Sure, there might only be one solution, but there are different ways of thinking about it. So I think math is one way to actually boost that creative mindset and have a lot of discourse about different ways of solving a problem.
Katie, what would you say? Do you have any suggestions on how parents can successfully support their child with math homework? Perhaps if they don't recognize the methods?
Yeah, I think if the parent is comfortable with it, they can and should read the way that the teacher is trying to explain a particular concept. I think it's fine to tell the student, this is the way I would do it. But I've seen oftentimes there's a certain way that the kid needs to learn, and it's all valid, because like Brian said, there are different ways of solving a problem. So I would encourage the parent to read that textbook and try to understand it if they don't know. I have full confidence that they would be able to learn it with their kid, and then together they can solve the problem with that method that the teacher's trying to teach.
Brian just recently mentioned pictorial learning, for instance. One of the questions that had been suggested to us is sort of a specific question. Is it okay if my elementary school child uses their fingers or other shortcuts to count or do math problems? And at what age would we expect to see that end?
I mean, I think it's totally fine. If they're just starting to learn, then yeah, any way of exploring math physically, on their fingers, is great. And eventually they won't need to use their fingers. It really depends on what age they start, I guess. If someone doesn't learn to count until they're 30 years old, then a 30-year-old might be using their fingers. I mean, hopefully by then they know how to count, but I think there's just a process by which people learn, and everyone is unique. So if they want to learn on their fingers or with objects, that will help them get that fundamental understanding. And then from there, they might not need those tools, but everyone's at their own pace and has their own ways. So whatever works.
Is there any place in modern pedagogy for the students to utilize memorization? I think in the past there was a certain emphasis placed on some of this stuff, that kids should just know it instantly. Like if we ask them 9 times 5, they should just know 45 without having to work through it in their head. Is there any wisdom in also teaching a healthy amount of memorization?
Do you think it's important to have those just down? Because otherwise it can really slow you down with more advanced math. I remember when I was 5, my dad made me do 15 minutes of just arithmetic every day. There was this bar that went down, and I had sometimes just a few seconds to answer the question, but I really knew my multiplication and division, and that served me very well going forward. At the same time, like, students need to understand what they're doing. They shouldn't just memorize 9 times 5 is 45 without knowing what that really means in practice. But like 9 groups of 5 or 5 groups of 9. But yeah, I think memorizing things is important to a certain extent, as long as they understand the principles behind it.
With your math problem of, what is 5 times 9, back to, respecting the different approaches. You could 5 times 9, math fact, I got it memorized, I just know it, it's automatic, versus, well, maybe a student, they can get to it, but they need to skip count by 5s. We start skip counting by 5s in Ohio with the second grade standards. Maybe they're still skip counting by 5s in 3rd grade, and they go 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45 is 45. Another student's going to look at that and say, well, 9 is close to 10. 5 times 10 is 50. I'm going to subtract 5 and I get to 45. And you again, you're having those mathematical conversations around all of the different ways I can get to 45. And what's also nice is maybe somebody else needs to, they need to draw out their 9 rows of 5 or 5 rows of 9, depending on, whether you want horizontal or vertical rows in your array or your area model. And those are all appropriate because that's where the student is in their learning. Some may need those supports. And what's also nice is, well, for the learner who says it's 45, I just know it. That's wonderful. Show me, prove it, convince me. I'm not certain it is. I think it's something else. And now you have to have that, again, you're challenging them with that discourse, prove it and justify your reasoning. But now you have to justify it in another way because, back to something I said earlier, mathematics is really about learning to solve diverse problems and become a strong communicator. And for that student who just knows it, okay, well, you know it, but now you have to communicate it to somebody else. So you have to explain it maybe in another way because your way is not familiar to who you're trying to convince. And so it's really placing that value and that importance on the different mathematical thinking and approaches of problem solving that there are for a variety of problems. And many of them can be those routine familiar problems that we know, like 9 times 5 or something, far more complicated. What's the best route to get to where we're going for a destination, or we've got so much time to get our chores done. How do I do that the most efficiently? It doesn't matter. There's a whole lot of, you're going to solve problems all day, every day, the rest of your life. It's the world we live in.
Katie, you mentioned your father sort of quizzed you, or he gave you activities to do. Can you talk a little bit of, practically speaking, what parents can do? I think some parents are comfortable doing that. Other parents probably feel there's no way they're going to be able to get their kid to sit down and do a worksheet. So what are some ways that parents can get practical effects of what you did with your father?
Yeah, my dad actually bought me textbooks from a very early age. So he would go to like the thrift store. I don't know where he found them, but he would he'd come home with a box of books and he would have me pick one and just go through it at my own pace. Or sometimes he'd, challenge me, like, get through 2 pages today. And I think it was a subtle encouragement, like, you can learn on your own and math is important. So that really helped me. It was like brushing my teeth, like just practicing math and learning math was just part of my everyday expectation. And it helped me learn to self-study, for one thing, which served me really well just throughout my whole life. And my dad actually rarely helped me. I don't remember him helping me at all with my math when I would just go through the book. And I necessarily think this is what every parent should do, but I think there are ways to show kids that math is important. And by like giving them tools to practice and encouraging it every day, you're kind of reinforcing that behavior. So I guess one analogy, I have a 9-month-old son now, and he started solids when he was 6 months old. And of course, when they first start, they spit it out. And the advice is just every day, just keep trying to give it to them. Don't give up. And eventually they'll start eating. So I think it's similar with math. Like, even if they say, no, I am not going to do math today, maybe they won't, but try it again the next day, try it again the next day. It's just constant encouragement and reinforcement.
Yeah, materials are great, but also, for parents who maybe don't have the time to go and review and select and identify materials, using the world around you. The grocery store is a wonderful, real world classroom. If you've got pre-K through grade 2 learners, having them go and help you count out 6 oranges, or I need 12 apples, or I need 3 cucumbers, or we want to make something for dinner and we need 5 peppers. So go count me out 5 peppers where there's some green, some yellow, and some red in there, and let them, kind of problem solve that way, because it's a relevant real world environment for them to be able to count and to see the applications in a way that's very meaningful for them. Beyond just school, you could even continue that as you get students in, grades 3, 4, 5. Everywhere you look in a grocery store is going to be an array, an area model. It's going to be something that reinforces groupings. And so, okay, is it 3 rows of 4 or 4 rows of 3 with the eggs, or is it, nope, it's 6 rows of 2. It's, how do they see it? Why do they see it that way? Just being able to get those conversations going in a way that's very meaningful as you think about, moving away from numbers for a minute. Geometry, what shapes and 3D figures do you see in a grocery store? You should see spheres and cones and prisms, and where are those in the real world environment? Just as you're going kind of up and down the aisle, or elapsed time if you've got students 3rd grade and beyond, or just even telling time in elementary school, teaching them how to tell time. We were at the store, we walked in at 1:57 and we were there for 18 minutes. What time is it going to be? What time was it when we walked out? Just getting them to just see these are real world uses of the math you're learning in elementary, and you don't have to really do a whole lot of additional effort to illustrate that to students, because it's everywhere. It's just a matter of getting them to recognize it.
That reminded me of one thing my dad would do also when we were on road trips and we could see the road far ahead of us. My dad would point to this landmark, like, see that tree? How many miles away do you think it is? And we would guess, and it'd be a competition. And then he'd start the odometer, and then we'd see who won. So that was just a fun little measurement math exercise. And there's so many ideas like that Brian reminded me of.
Brian, earlier you mentioned briefly the issue of recovering from pandemic learning loss. The next question really is if you can assess briefly for us what you think the level of learning loss was for most kids in that elementary school range, and what can parents do to make up ground? What's the long-term outlook on that?
Some of the data we're seeing from the department, certainly the lower elementary grade students, they seem to have struggled slightly more than maybe the middle school or the high school, which those grade bands struggled tremendously as well. But some of it, I wonder if it was in part to the fact that those students were just, they were not as familiar with some of the technology at the time. They were not as accustomed to working maybe asynchronously, whereas some of their older siblings or older students in the school system may have been able to use some of the technology like YouTube, or Khan Academy has some wonderful short videos if I just want to see another wording of a concept or see another application, just to help build a preliminary understanding. Where our middle school students and high school students could do that, they could get into Zoom meetings or FaceTime with each other, and they could have that discourse peer to peer to try to problem solve together. I'm not necessarily sure that some of our earlier elementary students were as equipped to do that, and so it was probably more of an adjustment for them because it was so new to them, and they were thrust upon an unprecedented situation. Another thing I think that really impacted our elementary students was at an age when a lot of the learning should be heavily incorporating physical and pictorial, virtual, concrete manipulatives. Some of the schools had trouble really using those with regularity because of the possible risk of exposure, contamination. If you've got students who, may in the early pandemic have been not feeling great, and then they're touching number cubes, linking cubes, base 10 blocks, and anything of that sort, and then you're going right to the next period, and you haven't really had time to clean them off, and you're just spreading the germs around to everybody. So, our elementary learners, they had maybe a little bit harder time. We're certainly trying to identify where some of those areas of unfinished learning are and provide some supports to help get them back on track. But it's going to be a while, because with math, a lot of that content spirals from one year to the next. And so, if you have a gap in an earlier year, there's going to be times where we can use the next grade level standard to help reinforce, without necessarily going and reteaching the lower grade level. But that takes time. That takes some effort from teachers, and it's not always easy to have to go and create all those scaffolds and supports, with all the other demands right now on our teachers.
Katie, I'm guessing as a consultant, this is something that you've dealt a lot with. Can you weigh in on what parents can do?
Yeah, that's a really difficult challenge. I feel for the parents that were at home and their kids couldn't go to school. Yeah, I think what we've talked about today, just always having a positive mindset about math, just, trying your best. That's all you can really do. And, being disciplined about prioritizing learning over the many other distractions. Like, kids have the Oculus Quest these days and so many gadgets, and they want to text their friends. I think it's just generally being a parent that is the day-to-day thing to do. Like, be the best parent you can, which I'm sure everyone already is. Try to get your kids to prioritize their learning and growing. It's hard. I mean, I only have a 9-month-old, but I'm sure I'll encounter these challenges too.
Speaking of specific techniques, does using a reward system work? For instance, not allowing a child to play with their video games until they've done some math. Does doing things like that just create a desire for the reward as opposed to a desire to do the math? Or is that somehow a way parents can balance these things that are competing for their child's interest?
Yeah, I think it's an interim solution, especially for kids that don't want to do math. Then yeah, do what you have to do. If it's get them to do their math first before they can play on their quest or go out with their friends, then that might be what it takes. But at the same time, reinforce when they've done their math, reward them positively with praise, wow, you did that by yourself, or you did such a great job. Take the shift away from the quest when you're praising them, instead of jumping straight to, okay, good, now you can play with your quest. Really emphasize that the fact that they've done their math and they did a good job and they tried, and they're doing great. And then, yeah, maybe eventually they won't need the quest or some, carrot dangling in front of them to do their homework.
The next question is, what should a child know by the time they're in kindergarten? Or what should they know by the time they exit elementary school and move on to middle school? Can you give us some benchmarks or some practical guidelines that parents can use?
Yeah, and so we have the Ohio Learning Standards in Ohio, and those are what has been adopted by the State Board of Education. That identifies what students should know, understand, and be able to demonstrate at the end of a grade level or high school course, for that matter, when they get old enough. In terms of what should they know, that'll give you a framework. And what we kind of recognize is every student going to leave every grade level proficient or above? Probably not. That's just not the reality of the world we live in. So, okay, where are they in the learning progression? And what do they need to do to get to the next phase? And those are really good conversations to have with your classroom teacher. Where are they in their demonstration of this topic? How are they mathematically problem solving something. And we'll give like an example. I have a pre-K student, and so in pre-K they do some geometry work, which is sorting. So whether she doesn't need to know that we do this for this reason, but one of her chores is she has to put away silverware, so she has to sort based on criteria. Sometimes her criteria is she puts forks with forks and spoons with spoons and butter knives with butter knives. Other times, if any parent is listening, sometimes it's the dump. I put all the silverware in the drawer because that's where the silverware go, and that was my sorting criteria. But we talk about why, and we just get that discourse going. Why did she group the way she grouped? And just have her explain her thinking and her reasoning. So it's not like I'm having her do academic work as a reward or a punishment, but having her do academic work because again, that's relevant real world stuff. You're going to grow up, you're going to have dirty dishes, you're going to need to clean them, you need to put them back in the drawer or put them wherever you put them. Or the same thing with my my elementary school student. Okay, you've got laundry, where are you going to sort your clothes? And hopefully socks go with socks and pants go with pants and shirts go with shirts. He's third grade. We're just going to y'all know how that ends. But we're working toward it, and we're letting them kind of make some of those decisions and having the conversations around why and doing the parenting, but also, whether he knows it or not, there is that academic component behind it. Since third grade deals with elapsed time, doing a lot more questioning with him every morning, getting ready for school of, okay, what time is it now? What time do you need to be ready? How many minutes do you have left to do what you want to do? And if you have to brush your teeth, find your socks, find your shoes, get your coat and brush your teeth, well, then how much time does that leave for you to watch your iPad? Then get your stuff done, you have more time for iPad. But him kind of being able to make those decisions but make it in the context of, okay, well, it's elapsed time. I need to know how to tell time. I need to figure out how much time I have left. I need to figure out what I want to do and make, the appropriate decisions given what he has to do to be ready to go for school, as opposed to, doing anything where I don't ever want to make it appear that academic work is meant to be a punishment or an add-on, but rather, let's find a way to make it its own reward. If we're reading for 20 minutes before bed, it's going to be a book. What's a book that you want to read? What's a story that you want to read? Then let's get it from the library. And okay, like early in the pandemic, sometimes that meant we read comic books. So we read the Planet Hulk comic book. Because that's what he wanted to read. So that's what he was reading. And then after that book was done, we find something else that's less of a graphic novel, but we're reading.
Is there any benchmark that parents should look out for that may be a sign that their kids need to be steered back onto the path of liking math? Is there something that they should be able to do by a certain age, or something that they should be at least showing by a certain age?
And I'd probably keep coming back to learning is a progression. It's a process. Students are going to be probably on track in certain areas, maybe need a little bit of help in others, and they may be slightly ahead than their peers in other areas. That's sort of what to be expected. But how do we reinforce? How do we support? And I think that's where it comes back to the earlier discussions around placing more of that emphasis on the mathematical thinking and the diverse approaches to problem solving, because there's often more than one way to solve a problem. And so I can use maybe a strategy from an earlier problem or an unrelated problem. Well, now I can apply it in this maybe non-routine or unfamiliar context that I didn't really realize before, but now I'm starting to make those connections across concepts. And that's where having that conversation as adults, caregivers, parents, families with your students in showing the different ways that you think about it, because that will reinforce the mathematical connections for the students, so that if there is something they're struggling in, they have a strategy or a support to provide them an entry point into problem solving. They at least know where to begin, and they've worked to develop the mathematical language, whether it's formal or informal, and especially with elementary students, it's probably going to be a lot more of the informal, which is okay because they're learning, they're developing, but they can communicate where they're beginning in their problem solving, why they're beginning, and they can start to communicate why they're struggling, because that's a big thing with a lot of students. They struggle, they don't know where to begin, and they don't know how to tell you why, so they suffer in silence.
Some kids, and even some adults, say, "I'm just not a math person." What should parents tell their kids when they believe it about themselves, that they're not good at math? How do they get their kids to believe that they can be good at math?
Yeah, I hear that all the time. I think it's important to just avoid saying things like that aloud, because then it reinforces this that potentially negative mindset about math with their kids. I think just generally the way we think about math is it's like a separate thing in our lives when really it's integrated into everything we do. Uh, the mathematics as a field is just putting symbols to just be able to describe our everyday life on paper and in a dialogue. Like there has to be a way to express how like groups of things coming together, how much you have. Well, then we have the plus sign. I mean, that's just a simple example. So really, everyone is a math person. Everyone uses math. Everyone has to think about things using a math mindset like every single day. So I don't think anyone can fairly describe themselves as not a math person. Maybe they haven't fully grasped the way the symbols are used, and that's fine. Like that is a lifelong learning thing that you could learn it your whole life. And it can get very complicated. But really, everyone is a math person, I would say, in simply. And it's just about how we talk about it and recognizing what there is still to learn about the way society has developed tools and symbols and ways of describing these math concepts that are all around us.
Yeah, I would kind of go to the two fundamental criteria for being a math person, and hopefully this applies to people watching. First and foremost, are you a person? Second, do you do math? You are a math person. Congratulations. Welcome to the club. We've got jackets. And so what I would kind of encourage with parents is foster a growth mindset. And what I mean with that is if you're saying, well, I'm not good at math or I was never good at math, you're giving this impression of a fixed mindset where because I wasn't good back then, I can't be now, or because I'm not now, I can't be in the future. And rather than foster that fixed mindset, encourage very much a growth mindset of, I may not be able to do whatever skill or demonstration now today, but I just have to work harder and I will be able to do it tomorrow or the next day or in the future, because I can learn that. I know I can demonstrate that. I just need to work a little harder to be able to do that. And another really good thing is when giving feedback to a student, even if it's maybe constructive feedback, the value of closing that feedback with just a simple statement of I'm giving you this feedback because I believe in you, because I know you're capable of doing this. I'm doing it because I want to see you do better, and I know it's in you. And just letting the student know that whether it's your child or as a teacher working with a student in a classroom, letting them know just how much you constantly believe in them, and that they can do it. Another thing kind of with the growth mindset, if you look at some of the research the last several years coming out of Stanford University, there was a study by Dr. Jo Boaler who she looked at students who were given a challenging, a rigorous problem, and when they were told, well, you did well on this problem because you're good at math, they were more likely to take a less challenging problem the next time. Whereas students who were given the same challenging problem but different feedback, and the different feedback being, you did well on this problem because you worked so hard, that second group was more likely to take a more challenging problem on the next one, because it wasn't that they were fixed, that they were just born good at math, because that's just not the case. It's they did well on it because they worked hard on it. And it was that hard work and that effort that led to their success. So they were more willing to work just as hard or harder on the next problem and the one thereafter. And that's that growth mindset that, I think parents and families, everyone can foster in their student is, where are you today, and how much better could you be tomorrow or next week if you continue to work at it? And I'm here to support you every step of the way.
Well, that brings us to the end of our conversation. Thank you so much, Brian and Katie, for taking the time to chat with us today.
Thanks. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.
And we'll see you back here for the next Ohio Learns 360 webinar.